Hi, Dr. Pooja. Welcome to the Empower Nutrition Podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. My life's goal is to understand more about PC, which we'll talk about more. I think it's the most fascinating thing, but and of course today we're talking about how it's connected specifically to mold illness and helping with mold illness, and I think we'll touch on just cellular health in general related to that, but I just have to take a minute and think about your background. You have such a fascinating background. You have the PharmD, you have your nutrition credential, you have and you have your IFMCP, which is like the most well established and well regarded functional medicine certification as well. And so, like, tell me more about that. Tell me more about your journey into this space and how that came to be.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Well, I can say that it did not happen overnight, right? Like
Yeah, no,
that
nobody
was,
achieves all that overnight.
that was definitely an evolution. That was a lot of sort of exploration on my part, and a lot of just honestly sheer, I don't know if it's coincidence or just serendipity, like a little bit of the universe playing into it. But I will go ahead and say, like, I've always had a lifelong passion for science, biology, chemistry, just understanding the way that the human body works. And then when it came time to kind of deciding what to do with that passion, I chose to pursue a doctorate in pharmacy, with, of course, a focus on pharmacology and healing with the use of medications. And it's so interesting like looking back on that now because of kind of where I am today. But at
Sure.
that point in my life, like that was sort of the only exposure that I had, right? It was exposure
Right.
to like conventional medicine, exposure to how all these like innovative solutions could really help people. And and I still carry all that training and all that education and that knowledge and that way of thinking with me. But it wasn't until like I had graduated, I was working as a pharmacist for a couple of years, and then I started having my own personal health issues. And I often find that the story goes when you are in this space of integrated functional medicine, it's either you go through a journey or that of a loved
Yeah.
one, that kind of opens your eyes, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, for me, it was like personal health challenges with gut issues, hormonal imbalances. I was diagnosed with fatty liver disease at
Gosh.
like 26.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Again, a little wild now thinking back on it, but that really shifted my perspective, opened my eyes. And so I started exploring other options. And with fatty liver, a lot of the stuff that was coming up was around diet and nutrition. And so I kind of went, you know, head in. I did a deep dive. I kind of became my own case study, N of one, and started implementing these changes slowly. And again, not happening overnight. It was over the course of like probably 2 years. And I had never felt better. I saw this dramatic improvement. And I'm like, there's something here. How
Yeah.
come no one ever talks about diet and nutrition and lifestyle? So I was so inspired. And then that inspiration took me to sort of then formalize on what I had experienced, and then pursue a master's in nutrition, and then eventually led me to functional medicine. And I had, going fast forwarding, working for a couple different private practices. I had my
Mhm.
own private practice for about 4 years. And then I had my son, and I took some time off to think about what direction I wanted to go in. And again, I always think the universe is playing into this a little bit, but an opportunity came up with BodyBio, and that's where I'm at today. And I get to teach and train other healthcare practitioners about cell membrane medicine, phospholipids, just going back to that original love that I had for biology and chemistry.
Absolutely. And one thing you said that I really connected with was that your background in as a pharmacist is not lost. And it doesn't, it really carries forward, I think. and helps. I find that to be true. Actually, we both, I think you went to Rutgers for your,
Yeah, I did.
yeah, I'm getting almost to the end of my doctorate in Rutgers. I'm like going on my 5th year right now. And
Congratulations, you're almost there.
thanks. They're so conventional, and which I think, there's kind of like some people, they're very polarized, or it's like, oh, if you're in the functional medicine world, you reject anything that's conventional, and vice versa. But I find that kind of like conventional, sort of like rigid approach they take, that's, I would argue, almost like too tied to what's published in the literature, just because of the way, especially in nutrition, like the research is like hard to do well, and like not well funded. So if you just stick to that, you're kind of on shaky ground. But um, anyway, my point being that the fact that they still just rigidly stick to that, I think it has helped me in terms of like analytical thinking, understanding how to read and understand research, understanding like kind of like the borders of research, of like what it can say and what it's kind of limited, and what it can say and what you can take from it. So I think anybody with like a strong science background is advantaged in the integrative space, honestly.
Yeah, I do think the space that we're in today, it's a little bit of the wild, wild west. And so I am really grateful for my background because I think I'm able to look at things a little bit more objectively, look at it through
Mhm.
the lens of research, of course. Like, is there robust evidence behind this recommendation, whether it be a medication, a supplement, a particular diet or lifestyle change? Like, I agree with you. It
Yeah.
shapes the way that you view sort of everything going forward.
Yeah, I think it makes you less susceptible to sort of the dark side of the integrative health space. I think you might be alluding to, or like Wild West, meaning like there are some true quacks out there, and sometimes it can be hard to tell what's what, or like there can be like parroting of things that maybe people don't realize isn't, they took something from someone and they didn't realize that that thing wasn't really trustworthy. It's like I realize why evidence-based practice exists, and it's become pretty rigid, because I think it used to always, everything used to be the Wild West, where it was just kind of like doing stuff and trying it, and like kind of a game of telephone, like passing practices from one practitioner to the next. And there's definitely some harm in that we see for
Mhm.
sure in our practice. So um it's tricky to, that's another conversation. Probably we could do all
Oh,
conversation about like what the answer to that is. But I think kind of what we're saying is like there are pros and cons to both sides of it. And when you kind of like conceive yourself in both, I think that's like the ideal thing.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about mold toxicity, maybe a little bit. I mean, that's something that we're seeing quite a lot in our practice, and um, even helping us to learn more about that, update our kind of protocols and things. So maybe tell me a little bit about what that is like in your mind, of like when somebody says they have mold illness or mold toxicity, what does that really mean?
So now, again, now working for a company like BodyBio, where we focus so heavily on what we call cellular health, I think my perspective once again has shifted a little bit in
Mhm.
in sort of being able to answer that question. If you were to ask me, let's say a couple years back when I had my private practice, I would of course think of it as this biotoxin, this environmental toxin that sadly and unfortunately more and more people in the US are getting exposed to. I think a lot of that, of course, has to do with like changing weather patterns. And of course, it also depends on like where you live and so forth. But it is becoming a little bit more like front and center than it perhaps ever was before. And to recognize that there are some approaches that have been used time and time again, like some, one can say like heavy detoxification approaches or the use of binders to kind of get rid of the mold toxins from the body. But now again, having this level of understanding, I'm recognizing that the mold itself, the mycotoxins, are actually interfering with some of our body's most critical systems, particularly at the cellular and at the mitochondrial level. So, when we look a little bit deeper into the pathophysiology, we are seeing that Mycotoxins specifically can reach your cells, and they can start to destroy the membrane, the plasma membrane that surrounds your cells, and also the membranes that surround the respective organelles that sit within your cell. So, for example, mitochondria is one of those organelles that is found within your cells. So, the mycotoxins can not only reach the membrane itself, but then go further into the cell and start to destroy the membrane of the mitochondria.
Mm-hmm.
And then in doing so, it's creating cells that are now unstable, cells that are dysfunctional. Mycotoxins can also disrupt receptor function or protein function, where then it's like impairing the communication channels, right? I mean, our cells rely on these receptors and ion channels to essentially communicate. That's their main form of talking to other cells or eliciting a particular action within the cell. And so mycotoxins can destroy the very receptors that are responsible for communicating that message. It can increase something known as membrane permeability. We are probably, your audience is now familiar with like intestinal permeability. Many of us have also heard of like blood-brain barrier permeability. I want us to now think about it at that cellular level and also recognize that your cells themselves, the membrane can turn leaky, allowing for harmful substances to make their way in, which again will then upset cellular balance. And then once this initial cascade takes place, then all of a sudden it's this like almost rapid effect where there's more oxidative stress, there's more free radicals that are damaging the lipids, the proteins, and the DNA sitting within the nucleus, promoting
Oh, wow.
yeah. So once there's high levels of oxidative stress, high levels of inflammation, then effectively the cell will collapse, leading to cell death, also known as like apoptosis or necrosis, depending on which body system we're talking about. And it's a sad sort of
Yeah.
development for the state of the cell. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. That is so helpful. And tell me if I kind of got this part of it. It sounds like, and I relate to this really well. It's like you kind of on a more basic sort of understanding of mold illness, you think, okay, the problem is mold. There's mold spores in there. You've got to get those mold spores out using things like binders and other things. But what you're saying is kind of more like, okay, imagine that like your house is on fire and then you come in, you put the fire out. You still got a damaged house. And it's not simply adequate to put the fire out. You've got to kind of come in and like repair your house. It sounds like in some cases the house is even burned down, like the cell dies and then there's dysfunction from that. But even living cells that have dysfunction, there's all these sort of like downstream health consequences of that maybe are not simply addressed by like getting the mold out and like removing the exposure.
100%. I love the house analogy. You're right. So if the house is collapsing because let's say there's a fire, and so you happen to get the mold out and or you happen to remove yourself from that moldy environment, right? But there's still chaos inside of the house. There's still damage to a significant degree. And so true healing, or where you're to the point where you're thriving, right? You're truly healthy. That won't really take place until you address like the damage in the house, the electrical issues, the plumbing issues, so forth.
Sure.
You have to really go back from the inside out and fix that level of damage.
Yeah. I don't know if you know the answer to this question. It's a weird question, but one thing I always think out with mold is okay. Then it's the ancient question on mold testing. Like, do you actually test the spores themselves, or do you test the antibodies? And so we know that we develop these antibodies to mold. How much of this sort of like cellular damage and like cascade that goes on? Do you know if like is a lot of that related to antibodies, or is it the antibodies are kind of like this separate thing and like the damage is directly being caused by the mold itself or the mycotoxin?
I would say more of the damage is being caused by the mycotoxins themselves, but certainly being that this is a foreign invader, your immune system will get involved, right? And it will create antibodies, and it will do so to effectively protect you in future scenarios, right? And so that's why we always we tend to hear like, the person is doing well, they've recovered from mold injury or mold toxicity, but then let's say they're traveling and they happen to stay in a hotel for 3 nights, 4 nights, and it's like you can tell it's like a moldy hotel.
Yeah.
You can just kind of get that through just the smell
Yeah.
and the damp and this, yeah. And
Absolutely.
all of a sudden, they don't feel good anymore. And so even though they're in a much better place, I think at that point, it's those antibodies that have started to resurface. And
Yeah.
they're doing their best to protect you, but obviously in that process, you may not feel so great. And so I think it's definitely both, but probably in that primary point where you're still healing yourself from this toxicity, I would say it's more so the direct result of the mycotoxins. And so you first and foremost have to remove yourself from that environment and then start to rebuild that house, as you gave that beautiful analogy.
Sure. Yeah. So tell me about this. I think, let's go back to kind of the more basic thinking around mold. If we say, okay, we're going to remove you from the environment, we're going to give binders, maybe some other kind of like mold detox support, but just focus mostly on like removal and not sort of like healing.
Hmm.
What I think the thinking in that is that just eating food gives you nutrients, and then those nutrients are used to then heal cells. Tell me about that line of thinking of like, is that problematic? Because obviously what we're going to get into is a protocol that's more directly trying to focus on the cellular healing and detox. Why would it be that maybe you wouldn't want to just rely on food on its own to like heal these cells or like rebuild these houses?
Okay, that is an excellent question, and a nuanced question, right? Because if we were talking about another condition, let's say we're talking about any form of metabolic disease, diabetes, fatty liver, high cholesterol, a lot of that is driven by diet, right? And so the primary intervention in that case would be to suggest that that person start, eating more fiber, more balanced portions on their plates,
Sure.
like healthy amounts of protein,
Just generally healthy diet.
healthy
Yeah.
diet. Yes. And so, and then that will move the pendulum for them with regards to that disease state.
Mhm.
I don't look at mold, mycotoxin, or if you're battling another sort of environmental toxin illness the same way. And so with regards to mycotoxin toxicity, you are so depleted, right? Like the cells have become so depleted. And so your um, your baseline of what your level of normal health should look like, let's say it's up here, all of a sudden, when you go through a situation like mycotoxin illness, now you've dropped like 5 to 10 levels below your baseline. And so I don't think in that case, food alone is enough to help you kind of come out of that hole or that
Mhm.
deficit. And so we need to introduce powerful healing essential nutrients that will then bring you back to your baseline so that food,
Mhm.
once again, can be your main form of healing and can be your main form of medicine. But
Yeah.
still, if that deficit is still there, I don't think food alone in this particular case is going to get you there.
Totally makes sense. I mean, it reminds me of like, okay, you're like right now we're moving and looking at buying a house. It's like, okay, well, we have some down payment that we can roll over from our old house to bring down the cost of that house, but we have enough money to meet our month to month costs, but we don't have enough money to just fully purchase a brand new house in cash.
Mhm.
And that's kind of like what maybe a little bit similar to what you're talking about, where it's like when you have to recover from even like more obvious things that people probably has heard of, like a burn or a wound or something.
Yeah.
That's a sudden huge cost that you may, even though you can meet your like daily or monthly expenses of in terms of like the nutrients you need, you don't have enough cash to basically make that huge purchase or enough nutrients to accomplish all this healing of these cells. And I'm a big believer in that. That's a lot of what we're doing a lot of time with supplements. Like we use supplements every day in our practice because what we see, actually, it's interesting. We had a student this month and I asked her, it's her last week. I said, "Oh, what's something you learned this month?" And she said, "The thing that really stuck out to me is like looking at all these labs that you guys get. I'm amazed that almost everybody has nutrient deficiencies." It's like, I think what people don't realize is just eating day to day has gaps, even just for daily life, let alone this huge additional like demand that's put on someone with something like a mold illness.
Right. I
Yeah.
love that, and I love your analogies. It's like you're in debt, right? You're in a
Yeah.
significant amount of debt. You have to pay off that debt and then kind of start over again. And that's really when eating
Yeah.
well, and of course, eating well all throughout is going to be the most beneficial thing you can do. But for that temporary period, just introducing those essential nutrients. I call them essential nutrients, and we'll get into the phospholipids and
Mhm.
the fatty acids and so forth. Yes, there are supplements, but I truly feel like they're the raw ingredients that help to rebuild the framework of your cells.
Mhm.
And so just take enough for a certain period of time to get you out of that deficit, that debt,
Yeah.
and you're already in a better place.
Yeah. And there's synergy between them. So, like, let's say you can just push up one nutrient to like this added demand. Because some nutrients are easier to come by than others. So, maybe someone can easily get a bunch of vitamin C, but it's like really hard to get a lot of phosphatidylcholine or whatever. So, maybe tell me a little bit about like how it all comes together in terms of like what you recommend. Let's say I was okay, I've got mold illness, I've gotten myself out of the environment. What are sort of the things that you recommend, like all pulling together as a protocol?
Yeah. Um, so that's what we specialize in at BodyBio. Our flagship product is our phospholipid complex. So our sort of bread and butter is utilizing phospholipids, which I want you to think of as the bricks that make up your cell membrane. So that's like I said, our flagship product that we recommend for everyone to take, especially for those undergoing mold treatment to then help them rebuild their cells from the ground up. And like you said, it is different from let's say certain minerals, certain vitamins that you may be able to get by drinking a green smoothie or
Mhm.
even if you have a really healthy balanced diet, the raw sort of ingredient that you find in diet that is most akin to phospholipids would be choline. So many people may be familiar with choline in the context of, like, let's say eggs. Eggs are really rich in choline, or some forms of animal protein as well. Soybean is rich in choline, as well as like sunflower seeds. So there may have been a time, like back in the day, when if our ancestors were, let's say they were going through something like mold illness recovery, and they had an adequate supply of eggs, animal protein, or maybe depending on the culture, maybe there's a lot of healthy soybean in your diet. That level of choline may have been enough to for their bodies to then create phosphatidylcholine, uh,
Mhm.
which then allows for that cell membrane healing, right?
Mhm.
Um, why it's so different today and why that may not be enough from food alone is because, in addition to what you have personally going on, if it's that mold injury, there's also a barrage of other environmental assaults, whether it be other pesticides or other heavy metals, other forever chemicals, microplastics now. So we have this sort of upstream battle essentially. And so I don't think for our generation, sadly, getting enough choline from our diet will ever be enough to restore fully the health of your cell.
That's interesting because we actually I think it's only like 40% of women of childbearing age meet like the adequate amount of choline intake. But you're not just saying that. You're not just saying, oh, not everybody gets enough choline. You're even saying like if everybody did get enough choline, the way we're otherwise have dyshealth, we may struggle to convert enough of that choline to generate enough phosphatidylcholine.
Right. Or that it's getting generated, but then it's getting damaged, right? In the process of us just simply by existing, right? Eating, breathing, drinking. Again, sad state of affairs, but until there's significant shifts in what our environment looks like and the levels of toxicity in our overall environment, yeah, I would say it's an uphill battle for many of us.
Yeah. So when you take, let's say I have mold illness and cellular damage, if I take phosphatidylcholine, is it that it's replacing the pieces of my cell membrane that were lost, or is it somehow like displacing mycotoxin that's been sort of like embedded in that membrane, or is it both of those things?
Yeah, it's both of those things and more. But I think it would help to just give a little bit of context on the membrane, on phospholipids, and then we can get into how pieces actually go in and support. Yeah. So I mentioned this a few times now, but phospholipids are the very foundation, right, of all of our cell membranes. And bear in mind that for a very long time, even in the scientific community, we thought that the cell membrane was pretty much just a barrier, right? A simple wall or a barrier, keeping the bad stuff out and the good stuff in. But what we're now recognizing is that that's just part of the story. The reality is that the membrane is more like a command center or a computer. It's controlling and coordinating nearly every operation within the cell too. And so when these mycotoxins damage the membrane, they don't just poke holes in a barrier or a wall. They're quite literally corrupting the cell's communication network or the cell's ability to make certain decisions. And so that's why repairing the membrane is so central to restoring the health of your cell. And then that's
so good. Yeah, because you just think of it as like a bag, like the stuff you care about is in the bag and you don't really care about the bag, but that's not how cell membranes are. They're strongly involved in the communication, like receptors come to both sides of it, depending on what's happening in and outside of the cell that like basically send messages. And like you said, command center is like a perfect word for that.
Yeah, it's such a dynamic surface. And we never recognized that before. And I think the word is just getting out on how dynamic it really is. But yes, for the longest time, I think it was just what you learn in like 9th grade biology class, right? That kind of just sticks with you. You're like, oh yeah, the membrane, it's this barrier or the bag that keeps everything.
Yeah. Just total. Yeah. No, but it's huge.
But that membrane, it's made up of phospholipids. So I want you to think of phospholipids as that very foundation, right? And again, I'm not just referring to the plasma membrane itself. Remember that every organelle that sits within the cell also has a membrane. And so phospholipids are the building block for those organelle membranes as well, like your mitochondria. And I keep coming back to the mitochondria because those, again, going back to 9th grade biology class, like those are the powerhouses of your cell. They generate energy, right? And so if there's compromise there, then it's no wonder that anyone dealing with a chronic complex condition is going to, one of their hallmark signs or symptoms is always going to be fatigue, right? Because there's mitochondrial dysfunction. So when you're bringing phospholipids back in, let's say through an exogenous supply, through supplementation, all of a sudden they're going to help restore the membrane. So it's going to help heal and seal those damaged lipid bilayer. it's going to bring down oxidative stress. So it's going to neutralize something known as lipid peroxidation. And so all those free radicals that are being generated when there is damage to the membranes and the lipids that sit there, that's going to all start to like come down. And it's going to also promote like anti-inflammatory signaling just by helping to stabilize that membrane. It's going to improve mitochondrial function by enhancing ATP production. And then perhaps the most compelling, or one of the most compelling reasons I think, is that when you bring in a fresh supply of phospholipids, these will again naturally integrate and slot into your cell membrane because the exogenous phospholipids that we provide through our PC product essentially mimics the native membrane architecture. So it's very easy for what we have in our product to just fuse directly with the cell membrane. But as that is happening, simultaneously, these new phospholipids will be able to escort these embedded toxins out of the cell membrane, and including the mycotoxins, right? And so now these mycotoxins are leaving the cell. They will get dropped into your bile, and then eventually they'll make their way out of your body through elimination via stool. So assuming you have healthy bowel function, which we have, again, other products in our portfolio that can support with that, introducing the PC is kind of like you're not only getting cellular repair, but you're also allowing the cells to detoxify in a very gentle way.
Wow. It sounds like the whole protocol right there, but you guys do include a couple other things, and I know we don't have time to go into the whole exact thing, and obviously that's something that practitioners can do with their patients, but as I recall, and what we've been using is like there's an initial phase it's less, and then you move into like a later phase that adds more. But what else do you typically say to include with the phosphatidylcholine?
Yeah. So one of our other core products that I would recommend pairing specifically with our PC is a formula called Balance Oil. Balance Oil is our omega or essential fatty acid blend. It includes a 4-to-1 ratio of linoleic acid, which is an omega-6, and alpha-linolenic acid, which is an omega-3. And for some people, as I say that, I think the alarm bells might be going off a little bit because for those that don't know, omega-6 or linolenic acid is a seed oil, right? And so there might be some alarm bells going off there, and I will explain that in a little bit more depth. But really, this formula is designed to balance the sort of levels between omega-6 and omega-3 to then help manage inflammation and to help further support membrane integrity. So specifically, linoleic acid, omega-6, is needed to help support membrane structure and flexibility. So when I reference phospholipids, if we ever think about its chemical structure, we know that there is a polar head group. We know that there's a glycerol backbone and then 2 fatty acid tails. That encompasses a single phospholipid. And those essential, or those fatty acid tails, one of them almost always is an omega-6 in the form of linoleic acid. So not only do you need healthy fats to help further support the structure and the fluidity of the membrane, but to go a little bit deeper, linoleic acid is also the core essential fat that sits within the cardiolipin. And I haven't talked about cardiolipin yet, but I have referenced mitochondria a couple times. Your cardiolipin is a very specialized phospholipid that sits within the mitochondria. That plays a pivotal role in helping to generate energy, right? Or that ATP. And so if you're deficient in linoleic acid, or what's happening today is that most people have an abundance of omega-6, but it's typically in the form of like the oxidized or the rancid. right? They don't have actually enough of what we call functional linoleic acid.
We
So if
actually see this on fatty acids testing. So I agree with you. Yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah. I think more and more practices are diving a little bit deeper and wanting to understand the nuance of it's not what it once was. Like it's not as black and white as oh, okay, your omega-6 levels are high, your omega-3 levels are low. I want you to supplement with fish oil or eat, have more seafood
Yeah.
in your
When
diet.
you get the fast food that was like fried in the vegetable oil, that is different than the omega-6 that we're talking about. And specifically, the difference is whether or not it's been oxidized, which is a chemical change that changes how you can utilize it. Tell me if I'm getting this right, but changes a few things. The oxidative part of it makes it more pro-inflammatory, but in my understanding, but also how you can incorporate it into cells, I think is what you're getting at.
100%. So it is very much the quality of the fat, right? So if it is an omega-6, a seed oil, even like, well, think about corn oil, sunflower oil, safflower seed oil. If that's been heated up enough times, that is no longer considered functional. That is completely on the rancid and oxidized side. And if that were to slot into your membrane, which it will, it will fuse chemically with your cell membrane, that will essentially turn off the lights in the cell because it
Mhm.
will downregulate the cell communication. It will affect cell signaling. It will, again, just generate a lot more oxidative stress and inflammation.
Yeah.
When you replace that with functional linoleic acid, so cold pressed linoleic acid, which is found in our balance oil in the form of cold pressed safflower seeds, that will again also slot into your cell membrane, but have a radically different effect. It will effectively turn on the lights in the cell. It will improve communication, signaling, reduce inflammation, oxidative stress, so forth. And so I'm glad that we're getting into this granular level of
Same.
conversation because it is really not just all seed oils are bad or
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with seed oils. I think right now there's still these two big camps, and we have to recognize that there is a bit of truth in both, and also recognize that the sourcing or the quality of the oil
Yeah.
itself makes a world of a difference. Most people can understand like sourcing extra virgin olive oil, like getting the cream of the crop olive
Yeah.
oil as opposed to just like your basic refined olive oil. I think that
Yeah. Or like there's a difference between like a fresh egg and like a rotted egg.
yeah,
And that's like obvious to people. But with these oils, it's harder to tell because it's not like it smells like a rotten egg when it's in most of the food we eat. It's like everywhere. So
right.
that it's harder to identify it, but that is like a good, I think, way for me to think about it in terms of like when we say, oh, omega-6 is good or bad, you're talking about are eggs good or bad? Well, eggs are good, but it needs to be a fresh egg or else and maybe it's not a perfect analogy because in this, I guess it is in the sense that like the the rotten egg is harmful to you, whereas the fresh egg is healthy for you generally. There's exceptions to all things, but um, the rotted, oxidized omega-6 that's heavy in our food supply is harmful to you. The fresh, like as you said, great word, functional linoleic acid is an essential fat that you need for your health. And they're different foods, really.
Yeah. And we can definitely go with your egg analogy and think about like your generic egg and then the egg that's labeled like organic, pasture raised,
Sure.
all the labels. And you're like, why is it like a $10 difference here? And then you
Yeah.
dive into the nutritional profile and you're like, oh my gosh, the conventional egg is pretty much 99% like linoleic acid, quote unquote, like rotted or oxidized linoleic acid because that chicken was fed its
Yeah.
feed was
It was
maybe
cheaply produced with cheap or poor quality ingredients. So the byproduct is different for that reason. Whereas, like, yeah, you're going to pay more for good quality phosphatidylcholine. You're going to pay more for good quality linoleic acid because it takes more quality and care to like produce it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that good quality functional linoleic acid is an essential ingredient to help support cardiolipin in your mitochondria, help support overall membrane fluidity and structure.
Mhm.
And so that's one of the key oils found in our balance oil. And then we also have, like I mentioned, the omega-3 counterpart, which is the plant-based version. It's the alpha-linolenic acid coming from cold-pressed flax seeds. And that's going to really give us a lot of the anti-inflammatory properties of the oil. And so together, when you're able to pair the PC with our balance oil, I want us to think like, okay, PC is helping to rebuild the overall membrane, the overall architecture, and then the right fatty acids and the right balance will help support that cellular communication, help support healthy inflammation signaling. Because the goal also with inflammation is not to necessarily just outright eliminate it, right? We need acute bouts of inflammation. That is a key
Yeah,
sign
absolutely.
for our
Yeah,
immune system. And so it's to
yeah.
support healthy, balanced inflammation. And
Mm,
that's how these two phospholipids and essential fatty acids work together to help restore,
yeah.
help from the cell up. Yeah.
Yeah. What I love about this is that it's equipping. I feel like, what is functional medicine, right? Or upstream root. It's like what one of the fundamental like three things about the definition of it is it's like root cause, upstream care. And when something actually strengthens your body's own process for addressing this problem, I find that to be typically the most upstream thing. And like in this example, you're not kind of going in with this like stranger molecule that's going to hopefully bind some of this mold and like carry it out. You're really going in and you're healing your body's own natural detoxification processes and its own ability to um, to heal. Because I think that that is a truth that I've come to in this work is that there's not much I mean there is actually new things that the body is exposed to in terms of like you said microplastics for example and like chemicals we've created, but when it comes to mold is not a new thing.
Mhm.
It's something that's been in the world longer probably than humans, and so it rings true for me that there would be a way that the body already has to address this, and it's a matter of strengthening that process, especially in light of a world where like we don't typically get the amount of food quality, nutrient density, nutrient quality that we should be getting. And so, and sorry if that's long winded, but like I just really like approaches like that where it's like it because it's also more sustainable. If you're securing your own health and your own innate process and supporting that, I find that to be more sustainable than sort of like, okay, you come in with some expensive, like foreign thing that helps. Well, how long do you do that? How long can you afford to do that? How long can you continue with like the burden of doing that? That's kind of like a chore. It's not as it's more of like a band-aid, I think, in practice. And in the end, when you have more better health, or we're talking about like better cellular health, better nutritional status, you'll have a more lasting benefit, and also it'll have these other like downstream and like knock on and like related benefits that you weren't even trying to get because you're just becoming more truly healthy in the way that you naturally were meant to be, if that makes sense.
Makes complete sense.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
love it. And I feel like this hour flew by. I like could ask you questions. I mean, let's do a round two. Can we just do a round two another day? This is so great, Pooja. How can people learn more about Body Bio? It's the only PC I've ever wanted to use. I will never stray. I think I did try to stray at some point like 5 years ago and it was a disaster. So I never will. How can people learn more about Body Bio and everything you guys do?
Well, if I can comment on that real quick,
Yeah.
our our PC is truly special. It is the one of the only liposomal phospholipid complexes on the market. It has all four of the phospholipids that are needed to help rebuild your lipid bilayer or your membrane. And it is truly, truly liposomal. Many of the other competitors out there are triple lecithin packed in oil. And so they may read phosphatidylcholine on the product label, but I can guarantee you that there's a night and day difference in the quality. And as we spend so much time talking about quality and sweating, I just felt compelled to share that little tidbit.
It's
But
real.
in terms of reaching out to me and connecting with me, certainly you're welcome to go straight to the BodyBio website to learn more about the products. And then if you are a healthcare practitioner that is listening to this podcast, then you're welcome to go to hcp.bodybio.com and open up an account with us. And then once you do, you have access to like a ton of educational material, and then access to like one-on-one support with our clinical educators. I am one of those clinical educators. And so I would love to be able to connect with you personally and walk you through our entire portfolio, answer questions that you may have. And then certainly you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn as well.
Thank you, Dr. Pooja. I'm so grateful for this time. You're so intelligent and fascinating. And again, hopefully I can get you back and we can keep going because there's so much on this topic we can talk about.
I would love to come back and chat with you
All
anytime.
right. Sounds good. Thank you again for coming on the podcast and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, you too.